So Professor Ahmed is recording this lecture. I hope for the people who are taking part online, this is not a problem.
So this one doesn't work, right?
It does, but I guess this
stronger?
is better. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody, and now we are actually coming to the end of the day, but for us, as we planned it, the week of the day. So now we are going to hear a very important and neat professor, Professor Ahmed Ahmed. He is from the University of California and Santa Barbara. There is a long history of them, but here you did not give us so much about your background. You studied in Cairo, in Azhar.
Dar al-Ulum first, then Al-Azhar. Yeah. So I started in Dar al-Ulum 1988. After I finished my bachelor's degree in 1992, while I was doing my master's, I became a lecturer, an assistant lecturer. While I was doing my master's, I went to Sharia al-Qadim. Then I started to study both modern Egyptian law and studied with, the traditional way, going back to Usul al-Fiqh. And that was my genuine love and the first love. That didn't change, of course. Nothing replaced it. Everything had to fit, under the categories that Usul al-Fiqh created.
Also, Professor Ahmed is a guest professor since the 12th of or the 13th of June, and he has given several lectures for the doctors and for other students. He has several books, not only Housekeeper, but his own writing like Islamic law cases, authorities, and worldview, and also the faculty of the Sharia is one of the most important book from also Islam, modernity, violence, and everyday life. So we like very much to hear your lecture the rest of the day, because the title of it is already very, very interesting. Don't slack or break the human face, because God's image resides in it. So it's a very interesting title. I'm looking forward to hear what you actually do.
Thank you so much, Maha Al-Qaisi has been an amazing host. Muhammad Ragab and Ahmed Amir made this an unusual trip. I always enjoy my time. I love Santa Barbara, but I also enjoy my time away from Santa Barbara, the break I take. But this time has been really pretty special, because I felt that I had no restrictions. I got to know people very quickly. I connected with people. And the impediment of my limited German didn't make actually a big difference so far. I am very honored to be part of this group. I know everybody here thought about their work for a long time. And I had only about 2 or 3 weeks to think about, or maybe a little more, to think about this idea of talking about the human image, thinking about the human image. So I went in different directions, and this is what happened. So let me go through my points. And then, by the way, when we get to the discussion, anybody who would like to ask their questions in Arabic, that's fine, and I'll answer in Arabic. Anybody who prefers English, that's fine. So I hope that makes it easier. Sometimes we assume that we can communicate better in one language, but when we at least give the options, we learn something we didn't think about. So let's start with a simple question. What was the first human like? Was he or she like us? Same size? It's a big question. Same form? Here arises the question of the size of Adam. I know it's already complicated territory. Adam is just an Hebrew word that's taken from the Hebrew word Adamah, which is the word for earth. So that's the masculine earth. And he has to come first because then Eve comes, or Hava comes from his body. So we will start with Genesis because this is the text that tells us all these weird things, sometimes too many details. And in Genesis 6:15, we read, "This is how you are to make it." Now, these are instructions to Noah to build the ship. The length of the ark is 300 cubits, its breadth 50, and its height 30. From that calculation, Adam's size is only speculated at. There is no actual statement of how high he was, but he would be about 15 feet tall. So that's not that big. I mean, I'm 6'4.5", so he'd be twice my height. Genesis 1:26 goes, "Then God said, let's make humankind in our image." And this is the most complicated piece of this whole thing. And in fact, you will see at the end, if we can just chuck it, if we can just get rid of that sentence, many problems will disappear. But of course, we like problems also. So anyway, in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, and so on and so forth. Now, 5:5, that's still Genesis. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years. So we have a man who's about twice my height, and these are the estimates from Genesis, who lived about maybe 9 times what we assume a very old human being in our time might live, and who is, got these dimensions. So now, if we enlarge the inquiry and ask, what do we know about the divine and the human image? If there is this relationship, it's essential that God has created man after his image. Is this a meaningful inquiry? It is indeed an opportunity to ask broader questions. This is what I want to do about history in general, about religious history in particular. And the burden, what I call the burden of religion in the modern world. Because sometimes the Quran itself, forget about the Jewish material, the Quran itself can be an opportunity for you to think differently. Like I was talking about the verse where God and the angels are discussing whether you could have this world without humans at all. It could be an opportunity for reflection. But also a lot of the Quran is a burden, verses that we don't know what to do with. And this is an example from other traditions. So what is the burden that we get from Judaism and Christianity? Not just Muslims, of course, will see that the idealists, German idealists, also had to deal or contend with the same question. If you go to religious studies books, one of the textbooks written by a guy named Ted Ludwig, very famous text that people read called The Sacred Paths. On page 33, he takes this idea that human beings are created after God's image and say, well, it's not just a Jewish or Christian thing. Ancient Egyptians had a similar idea. And then he identifies some text that twists it very hard, because all it says is that maybe human beings were a spit of Ptah. Ptah is the original god of all the Egyptian deities, or one of them. And we will never know enough about Egyptian theology to know what the relationship between these gods are. But anyway, it's very common for us to take that Jewish dictum or the idea that there is a relationship between the image of God and human beings and go backward, look for it in Mesopotamian and in this case Egyptian religions, and of course going forward we're struggling with it. We struggle with it completely, while not aware of what comparisons or comparatives of religions will do in Islam's 14th and 15th century. That's our century. The Genesis legacy created a duty some of the Prophet's companions take upon themselves. So the problem, of course, is easily exported to all these companions. Companions, we don't know all of them. We have to trust them in general, right? We have to trust what they agree on. This is what the jurists tell you. Because, and also the reporters of the hadith, because what if we disagree with all of them? What if we think that they all lied? We have nothing to stand on. We can't guess what the Prophet was like, okay, right? We know this principle. And it is also why Orientalism tried to be creative and said, well, what if we chuck what these Arabs said and we just look for Greek evidence or evidence in Latin about Muhammad and see what kind of life is there? Where is the Josephus of Islam? Right? Josephus supposedly testified to the existence of Jesus, and he's not a Roman historian, and he's not one of the winners. He's just a neutral guy, supposedly. In fact, could be an enemy of Jesus. So who is the Muslim Josephus, who is the Josephus contemporary of Muhammad? And of course, nothing came out of that. Patricia Corona, God bless her soul, just worked very hard for nothing at the end. So you have to trust the companions, but you also can't trust them 100% because they go with the wind sometimes. One famous one, Abu Huraira, goes with the wind too much. This man converted to Islam just 3 years before the Prophet died, and somehow he has the largest number of stories. In fact, of course, this is not just a modern position. It was known that Abu Huraira reported too much. Sarakhsi in the Mabsut says, every time we get a report from Abu Huraira, we have to think about it. We have to scrutinize it, put it against what he calls PS. PS is the standard way of reasoning. So if we see that our reasoning, and it's a big structural problem, if we go with Abu Huraira, then we'll just chuck his reports. Okay. But of course, it is Abu Huraira who will give us the most problematic version of this, and it will be Bukhari who narrated it. And it goes, huh? Well, Aisha has her problems too. I mean, she wanted us to believe that she was too young when she married the Prophet, and it's created a big problem, as you know. Aisha was definitely older than Asma, and Asma had a kid, so Aisha she couldn't have been that age. But anyway, but you know, it happens. You know what women do sometimes when you're 70 and every evidence indicates that you're 70. You said, no, when I got married, I wasn't 30, I was 15. So that would chop about 15 years. I think that's behind that story, but of course we can't be sure. But anyway, in Bukhari, we have this statement about Abu Huraira, and it gets really ridiculous very fast. خلق الله آدم على صورته طوله 60 ذراعا. Okay, so that's 60 cubits. That would be actually about 28 meters, right? It'd be something like 88 feet. So who is 28 meters? Is it Adam? How big were the trees then? How big was the home that he fit in? Or was it God? God himself was 28 meters. How did he build this whole thing? So this is absolutely nonsensical. طوله 60 ذراعا. What does that mean? فلما خلقه قال اذهب فسلم على أولئك النفر من الملائكة جلوس فاستمع ما يحيونك فإنها تحياتك. It's just some some nonsense. It's very hard to make sense of, but of course it's a burden for all the exegetes. And if you're not willing, if you are Ibn Hajar, for example, Ibn Hajar is on a roll, and he's trying to say that you can't just easily dismiss Bukhari's work. The guy worked very hard. He looked at all his reports. It's about 4,000 plus if you don't count the ones that repeat, maybe 6,000 plus if you count them. And he has this comprehensive look at the whole thing. We can talk about the rise of this obsession with hadith, which may have started before the 15th century or the Islam's 18th century, but of course we inherited all of that. All of us were obsessing about hadith. If we have one hadith, we have to think very hard before saying, well, maybe we need to just think about it. Early Hanafis didn't have that problem. They could take a piece that is clearly something that deserves respect. لا نكاح إلا بولي وشاهدي عدل. Of course, what's the difference between marriage and just free love? It's the acknowledgement by the families, the acknowledgement by the side. So you need the wali and you need the two witnesses at least. But the Hanafis say, well, okay, wait. The Quran says, فَلَا تَعْضُلُهُنَّ أن ينكحن أزواجهن. If they are the maker of their own marriage, if they are the builder of their own marriage, maybe they don't really need the approval of the father, as many of you know more than me. So, but there is that phobia that we have of rejecting any hadith, of course, because Bukhari worked very hard. So we have a problem now at 28 meter Adam, if you're not willing to get rid of that. And then you go to the evolutionists, and they also seem to have some kind of dogma. The early humans have to be shorter. How many samples do you have? You know, of course, we have a habit, all humanities people, to be very polite with scientists. We don't inquire too much. They can spend a whole hour talking about how religion is so stupid and it doesn't have any evidence and it's all based on speculation. And then they make these assertions. But if I ask, well, how many old hominids, for example, or any of these early humans have you uncovered? Are we talking about 20 bodies, 20 pieces of bodies, or are we talking about 20 million? Because if you just only got 20, you could revise that considerably. They wanted, of course, to believe that the early humans were about 4 feet tall, right? We got taller, we got bigger over time. So 28, you pick 28 or 4. Now let's move from God created man after his own image to what the 19th century German Romantics did. They started to lose faith in this idea that we can learn something from the Bible. And they were very wayward in a way. They could reverse the story. So we got it first, actually, with Schiller. And I put Feuerbach first because he's more famous. There's that famous statement. He wrote this book called The Essence of Christianity, right? Or what would it be? Right? The Wesen des Christentums. So after a lot of discussion, he goes into denn nicht gut schuf den Menschen nach seinem Bilde, wie es in der Bibel heißt, sondern der Mensch schuf, wie es in Wesen des Christentums zeigte, Gott nach seinem Bild. This is the assertion. Der Mensch schuf Gott nach seinem Bild. That was in 1850. And of course, that was the last sigh of frustration. He was done. But the one who prepared the way for him was Friedrich Schiller. When he was inaugurated at Jena, and that was in 1789, he said, put this in English, it was just the German is very short at the end. He was talking about how human beings everywhere, in Africa, in Indonesia, in China, everyone imagines God to look like him. So if you're a Buddhist, you're going to look at human beings in your area, in Nepal or India, or after Buddhism goes to China and Japan, then you look at the people around you, and God has to be just a good version or a better version of these human beings. And there is, of course, with that goes that obsession with man, God being a man, because the man seems stronger than the woman and can be taller and so on. And in Aristotle's time, also a man lives longer. In Aristotle's mind says the best marriage, there'll be a 17-year difference. The guy who's in his late 40s, and look for someone in her early 30s, so that they can die together and be a happy life. So the obsession with the image of man in a certain culture and generalizing from that. Anyway, Schiller was very explicit. So there you could see a despot of Africa negotiating his subjects for a sip of brandy. Here, they were slaughtered on his grave to serve him, etc., etc. And at the end, it's all the image is coming from the culture. So he goes, man, he uses the expression malt sich, so either grinds, paints, or depicts himself in his gods. Okay, der Mensch malt sich in seinem Götter, in his gods. Now, of course, if we have doubt that this was influential and this may have influenced Feuerbach, I'm not sure, but I found it in Georg Simmel, for example, the sociologist. Same expression. He was talking about religion, and it says one of the things about religion is that they're all local. Right? You heard that expression, politics is all local. religion is always local. So if you are a Finnish guy or a Finnish community, you're going to imagine a God that kind of looks Finnish. It's one of the problems, by the way, in the United States when people say, well, how come all these depictions of Jesus, who's also God, right? He's God's son, why does he look white? You know, he has to look a little dark. The guy spoke Aramaic and lived in Palestine. So like, he should have been more like me or like Ahmed al-Bariya. So why is he so white? Right, of course. Yeah, that was big in Black liberation theology, of course, right? We have actual depictions of Jesus very black. By the way, recently I went to the theater and the Alexander Hamilton play does exactly that. They have Washington, even this is playing too much with history. Washington is black. Madison is black. They have all of them black. And they basically question the idea that America was built by whites because Hamilton himself was from the Caribbean. He was probably darker than all these images of him. Hamilton is the first treasurer. And without him, the Revolutionary War wouldn't have worked. So there wouldn't have been an America, right, without this guy. So anyway, moving along. So we want to get to something about Islam other than the impact of other ideas and other religions. Before Islam and after, we have these problems. So is it possible then to see anything beyond an anthropomorphic view of God? I mean, they're just mirror images of each other in any text. So when I see Inna Allah khalaqa Adam ala suratihi, even if I don't have the Abu Huraira problematic version, is it possible to think of this as belonging to any other discussion? Then we go to Ibn Khuzaymah, and in Kitab al-Tawheed, it has a very different version that looks more informative, even though it's shorter actually than the one that we have. It's just not just Abu Huraira. So many people have that Bukhari version, but it's not informative because it keeps going into these weird images of some kind of physical relationship between Adam and the angels and all the different sizes. It confuses you further. But this is so simple. لا تضربوا الوجه ولا تقبحوه فإن الله خلق آدم على صورته. That now is making some sense. When you're tempted to slap the face of your son or daughter, or of course, we also used to be your wife. A man has the right to be his wife. This is a human being, or your slave, okay, when there were slaves. This is a human being. God is there. This is the idea. So God, of course, is in the rocks also. Why do I have the right to hit the rock? I take the rock and I hit it. I can cut it into pieces. I can build a home and live in it. In fact, also, if you're not a vegetarian Muslim, well, you also take the face of the animal and you cut it and you cook it. So it's only human beings, supposedly, after all the doubt that we could have from the dialogue with the angels, but it is only human beings given their responsibility and given their capacity to reason and all that, that when you treat them, think about God. Different. Could be a prison situation. I'm a prison guard and you are a prisoner. God is there in your face. I can't just hit you. I can't just deprive you of food. God is there. Different relationship between human and human as opposed to anything else that God also created. And we might agree that God is everywhere. You don't have to be a pantheist to think that. You might think that God is everywhere in the chairs and everything. But when his presence, God's presence in human beings is different. Because there is that surah, the mysterious surah. And of course, it's not going to be physical. And it's not going to end up with any measurement of Adam. W.C. Smith, that comparatist who insisted to go against the going against the grain and telling every Christian who was doing comparative religion safely, of course, thinking that Christians will always win with comparative religion because Judaism is underdeveloped and Islam is just a bunch of heresies, right? You know this idea in the Middle Ages, Islam is the sum of all heresies. A little bit of Arianism, right? A little bit of Nestorianism, that kind of. So they were all safe, but W.C. Smith went against them and said, no, Islam thinks of itself as a better version of all the stuff that you study. It's okay if we disagree, but you just have to know that this is what Muslims think. Islam is an upgrade on all this, which means that it might have some of the stories, but it will just have a better twist. Now, I'm not saying, of course, this caveat is very important. I'm not saying that there are no anthropomorphists in Muslim theology. We have enough of them, okay? I'm fighting against them. The Karramis in the 9th century, 3rd, 9th century, all the way to Ibn Taymiyyah in the 8th, 14th century. Ibn Taymiyyah scandalously, as some of you know, kept talking about the hand and the crown and not the crown, the throne and all these things. And then they pushed him. So, okay, how did God istawa? He says, istawa ala al-arsh. And then he ascended the pulpit. He said, just like that. And Ibn Hajar mentions this, of course, saying, well, here's a way to lose friends. Because it doesn't matter how much people think that you're very smart. When you do stupid things like that, you lose it. You say, really? So Ibn Taymiyyah is simulating God's movement. The Karrami orientation is a real problem in Islamic theology, but it exists. Khabbazi, one of the Maturidis I've been reading now, he comes in the end of the 7th century, 13th century, and he polemicizes against Jews. He says, these Jews, they say that God is a jism, it's a body. Of course, Christians made it worse because the oneness of God is not different from the oneness of any other one. God can be three in one at the same time. He polemicizes against them. But yes, there are anthropomorphists. This guy is not. The Maturidis are not. But we have the problem. Okay, so I'm not standing here telling you that it is in fact exactly what I'm saying, that the burden of other traditions, when you just work too hard trying to reconcile ideas, and the mistake must have begun with the companions if Abu Hurairah actually said what he said, or otherwise with Bukhari, whoever insisted on keeping this precious piece of information that Adam may have been actually 60 cubits. I love texts, and I think that texts, every lover of text has the right to be free to interrogate them. There's no good reason, and I'm not saying that ignorance is ever an advantage. You have to study the different traditions, and you will see a lot of good things in Judaism. I mean, I've learned a lot, of course, from my teachers who were reading Midrashim and Talmud. It made me think, for example, understanding the Isaiah story differently, understanding the frustration that keeps happening to prophets. And it goes also with, as Muhammad Rahim was reminding me and telling me, that one of the issues with this angels thing was this worth it, creating human beings, is it's always the question given to all the prophets, but all the teachers, whether you should be so worried that you're not getting as much attention. Human beings are human beings, and freedom is a more important fact in the world than justice. Justice is just not going to happen frequently, but freedom is there. All human beings are free, just like the animals are also free to an extent. So I would love to search for the truth, but with this calm acceptance that we're not going to always get it right. I'll finish with something from Nietzsche. People who read Beyond Good and Evil, they know how he begins. Suppose truth is a woman. How do you treat a woman? You have to be nice. You have to be slow. Your advances can't be too harsh. And that's the opposite of what philosophers did. All of them were rushed too much. I want to get the truth in 30 years, 40 years. I don't have a lot of time. Spinoza, for example, or anybody. So all the philosophers, according to Nietzsche, were too pushy with that truth, which it should be treated like a woman. You should be a little more gentle. The truth and a physical and metaphysical reality, what we're made of, what the world is for, and the truth of history remain open. They have to remain open. But the burden of ideas we don't subscribe to is better set aside to allow us to do more with our inquiries. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this lecture. What happened, but you wrote your points on how it looks like here, the Quran, and so on. So there is this anthropomorphism which is actually inside all of us. Everyone has his own image of how it's possible. So now questions.
I recognize I am the obstacle to dinner. So I don't want this to go longer than it should be. Ahmed. Yeah, let me give you that, and then I.
Thank you. I will add comment. I linked some was council and spoke about human beings. Say, not like God, like how we look like, but useful because told us we human beings that come from that.
It has to be. It has to be metaphorical, of course. You know, even a Karami like Ibn Baz, he has a similar idea. Ibn Baz says, surah here just means the qualities. So God is Samia, the human being is Samia. It's not going to be the same Samia, but basically the basic qualities, the fact that we see, the fact that we hear, which is why these verses are problematic or they confuse us. When we talk about istiwa, when we talk, because, but if you just make a step backward, you wonder why do we need to even focus on these verses? Because, you know, I mean, I guess this is a philosophical view, and Ghazali didn't like it when Farabi and Ibn Sina said, occasionally the Quran is going to have too much metaphor. Okay, you can't take it seriously. Ghazali said, wait, so you're saying God is lying? Not really. But he is using a lot of metaphor. There's no question. I mean, Muslim philosophers said that a long time ago. There are metaphors, and in Sunnah and in the Quran. The problem with the Sunnah is that sometimes it just goes too far in this, you know, condescending or going down to the lowest common denominator, addressing the Bedouin who doesn't have any time. Very specific circumstances. So this is the language that's detaining us. You would never have the 60 cubits. The Quran has the 6 days, right, which is a problem, and we have 4 and 2. Thank God we don't have all the details of what happened in the first day and the second day. We have that in the Sunnah. We have some of these details. They come from biblical and midrashim sources, and then they're transferred to the Sunnah. It has to be a metaphor, Ahmed. There's no question. Yes, me? Uh-huh.
How you just take it at face value and I told him in one of his sermons, or at least the one that actually mentioned Banana, he says that you shouldn't actually go after the kite, because if you imagine it in your head, this is shirk, because then you have 2 gods.
So what problem did we solve with that? Very good. Very good. So you are comfortable with that.
With what they have.
Yeah, they say العرش معروف والسؤال عنه بدعة. Is that really a solution?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, how well do you know the next person, even your wife or your son? There is always a part of that person which is related. You are not the same person.
Yeah, we agree, which is why, so you realize your the ceiling of your intellect. This inquisitiveness seems to go in the opposite direction. It's a spirit of, it's exactly what Nietzsche is criticizing. I need to know. A lot of people want to see God in their dreams. They want to see, they want to talk. The whole Isra and Mi'raj thing also got people totally berserk, because they want to know what that looks like. You could see God. And yeah, actually Maha was telling us in Frankfurt about some of the depictions in Persian literature of God, of the Prophet Muhammad kind of prostrating in the middle of a sea of fire. Yeah, I mean, the imagination, you're not going to stop the imagination, but you have to realize it's the imagination. Yeah, please. Yeah, sure.
أذكر الحكاية في الناحية الأصولية والعقدية عند الأشعرية، قضية سقوط العقيدة بطريقة الحديث الأحد. والأشعرية أعتقد لا تثبت هي قضية يعني عقدية. القضية الأصولية حضرتك طرحتها في اتكلمت عن الأحناف وردهم بحديث أبي هريرة إذا خالف القياس، وجدوا كل الأحناف في لا يعني هو خبر الوحي أو الأحد. لا هو الأحناف يفرقون ما بين
عندهم مشهورة، عندهم خبر واحد وخبر مشهور.
يعني ليس طريقة، ولكن الأحناف معلق يعني تضيف إلى هذه الإشكالية
هي مشكلة كبيرة وأظن أنها فوق مستواي، لا أستطيع أن أحسمها، لأن عددا كبيرا من الأحاديث التي استعملها الشافعي، خاصة محمد بن إدريس الشافعي، وأعجب بها وكان يرد بها على المعتزلة، تتسق فيما تحكيه عن الله سبحانه وتعالى مع بعض الآيات. طبعا إذا كان لي الحق في أن أبني نظاما عقديا جديدا، يعني إذا استمعت مثلا لكلام الأستاذ عبد الجبار الرفاعي في الصباح يقول علم الكلام الجديد عليه أن يجيب عن هذا السؤال، تفسير جديد لقضية الوحي، هذه القضية الأساسية. ما زلت أعود لكلام قاله الفارابي منذ 1000 سنة في مسألة المجاز هذه. لا يمكن أن أكفر بالوحي، إذا كفرت بالوحي لم يعد هناك فرق بيني وبين من يقول إن خيالات النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أو كلامه كانت كلها من قبيل الوساوس. أنا مؤمن بالوحي، لكن كيف أفهمه؟ كيف لا يكون عندي حل جديد بعد كلام الفارابي في أن المجازات هي الأساس؟ طبعا الفارابي يفرق بين الفيلسوف والمتشرع. قضية عنده قضية تفسير. يموت النبي اليوم، فمن يحكم؟ إما فيلسوف أو متشرع. يقول هو إن المتشرعين يعني الفقهاء من أمثالي سيفسرون، يعني سيستعملون الخطابيات، لا يعرفون البرهانيات، هؤلاء الناس لم يدربوا فلسفيا، ثم هم أيضا لا ينتبهون إلى المجاز. عنده حق إذا كان الفقهاء والمتشرعون يفعلون هذا، حتى وإن كانوا أصوليين، إذا كانوا يفعلون هذا فهم لا يستطيعون تفسير كلام النبي في أصوله في أسسه. حتى مثلا يعني إذا أردت أن أكتب كتابا مثل كتاب الشيش محاسن الشريعة يفسر فيه الأحكام، أحيانا يتأمل في العبادات، لماذا تصلي 5 مرات؟ وهو لا يخاف من هذه الأسئلة. يقول إذا صح مثلا أن 3 أحسن من 5 سنغيرها، لكن من يقول أن 3 أحسن؟ وهكذا. هناك أشياء كثيرة في مسائل الخمر، في مسائل الخنزير، هذه الأشياء يعني تستحق تفكيرا فلسفيا لا يقدر عليه عدد كبير من الفقهاء. تعال العقيدة أصعب طبعا. الفارابي يقول إذا كان المفسر فيلسوفا فهو يعرف الحقيقة، وبالتالي سيعرف كيف استعمل القرآن المجاز، وهذا أيضا فوق مستواه، لم يصل أحد منا إلى هذا المستوى. لكن ربما جماعيا يعني بمجموع، ربما ليس في هذا القرن، لكن في وقت من الأوقات عندما تقوم لنا قائمة لابد أن يكون هناك هذا العلم الجديد، أن ننظر إلى الوحي فلا نخاف منه ولا نخاف أيضا من رده. نحن نخاف، نحن خائفون، وأنا معك خائف أحيانا من أن أفعل أشياء فعلها أبو حنيفة. طبعا عندما أرى هذه الجرأة أتحرر بعض الشيء، يعني مثلا في مسألة لا نكاح إلا بولي، هذه مفيدة لي، أن هناك أحكاما كثيرة، مسائل الميراث مثلا نحن متقلبون فيها مترددون. إذا كان الحكم معللا أي شيء طبعا يخضع للقياس سهل التعامل معه. المشكلة فيما لا يدخل في القياس، الحدود والكفارات والعبادات والمقادير، والأسف منها الميراث. لكن إذا كان مثلا أحد الأسباب إعطاء الأنثى نصف الرجل هي أن النفقة لا تقع على عاتقها وتغير هذا، فلا بد أن يتغير الحكم. فهذه هي المسألة. إذا تعاملت مع الوحي سواء كان الكلام عن الله سبحانه وتعالى أو عن البشر أو عن الأحكام أو عن الرجل بقدرة حقيقية، عندك النظرية متكاملة. هذا شيء حاوله الأستاذ حسن حنفي، لا أظنه ناجح، لأن يعني التدريب مطلوب، لابد أن تكون مدربا في الفقه وفي الأصول وفي العقيدة، وهذا شيء بدأناه منذ نحو 20 سنة. لكن لابد أن يأتي جيل من الناس لا يخاف من البحث في فعد إلى مسألة خبر الواحد. نعم، قد لك أن تقول إن أكثر أخبار الآحاد لا توصلك إلى معنى جديد، ولك أن تقول إنها مفيدة جدا وإنها ضرورية في تكملة بعض المسائل. عليك طبعا أن تبدأ بالقرآن والمتواتر. شكرا، تفضل. Very good.
Thank you for this talk. Going back to this hadith, I think if I'm wrong, it's a issue of an atomistic view on verses of ayat that we pick and don't put it into a bigger observation. If you take, for instance, if you create a hierarchy, you say on the base of this hierarchy there's the Quran. Then you have a ayah like basic chemistry shape, which is your ground, and on this ground you can put the throne of Allah, His face, and also this hadith. But it gives you a framework how you have to understand it. Because if Allah says basic chemistry shape, this means you do have a framework. Even though he talks about, even though as the Prophet Muhammad said, Allah created man on his image, basically he shaped, so you have to interpret it.
Definitely, yeah.
So it's kind of looking at hadith or in a atomistic way, just picking one and trying to understand it without seeing the whole concept. And I think it's the same with the hadith focus. We look at the Quran as a whole, and we tend to have a holistic view on the Quran, and I think we have to look at the hadith corpus in the same way. We have to look at it as a holistic approach. So if you have this hierarchy, there's no way to say that God created man in his image, because you have this word, basically, shape. So it gives you kind of framework.
Right. Yeah. Oh, of course, ليس كمثله شيء is higher in its rank than anything you get from biblical traditions or hadith. The Quran, however, is part of the problem too in certain verses, as I said, because we have the arsh, we have the yad, وَلِتُصْنَعَ عَلَى عَيْنِي. I mean, we used to have hadith scholars, Sheikh Abdullah al-Judea. He's a fantastic man. He's now the head of the European research and fatwa. But there was a stage in his life, he was a hadith guy. He grew up in Kuwait, but I think he's Iraqi originally, and he lives in Ireland. And there was a time when he had God with everything other than the beard and the penis. And then he was explaining why the hadith traditions had these problems. It's just a burden. It's a burden, all these things. But I agree with you. So you're aware of how big the problem is. I agree that there must be a solution. And maybe the standard or the starting point is لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. It is, of course, a verse that everybody uses in kalam discussions to different degrees, right? Because the question is a question of courage. What do you do when reports surprise you? Like this, طُولُهُ 60 ذراعاً in Bukhari. So you're not belittling the problem is real. We're stuck with a real problem. Muhammad? Oh, who was asking? Sorry. For example, the size of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Yeah. Right.
شكرا على هذه المحاضرة القيمة والمفيدة والملهمة. أنا أعتقد معك كثير من التساؤلات التي أثيرت حول التناقض الذي يمكن أن يثيره تفسير الآية. أن الله خلق آدم على صورته، هذا يمكن أن يتناقض مع مبدأ التنزيه الذي يقول أن الله ليس كمثله شيء كما تفضل الزميل من قبل. كثير من المتكلمين حاولوا أن يتجاوزوا هذه المشكلة من خلال مسألة النفي، أنه لا يمكن أن نقول شيئا عن الله فننفي عنه كل شيء، فهو لا في مكان لا في زمان، لا يوجد حيز في اللحظة التي تنسب فيها صفة أو كيفية إلى الله تبدأ مشاكل التجسيم والتشبيه. وعلى فكرة ابن عربي كان واعيا بهذه المشكلة وحاول أن يقترح حلا يدمج ما بين كل هذه التناقضات، حين قال بأنه يمكن أن نتحدث عن الله بمستويات مختلفة، فهنالك مستوى الواحدية أو الصمدية، وهذا المستوى لا يمكن أن نقول فيه شيء سوى أن الله واحد. وهنالك مستوى الأسمائية أو مستوى الأسماء، حيث يرتبط الله بهذا العالم ويمكن أن نتحدث عنه بلغة علم الكلام، فهو حاول أن يدمج ما بين الرؤيتين ولعله قد نجح في ذلك. شكرا.
ليس الصوفية فقط، هناك من المتكلمين من استعملوا ما يسمى في اللغة الأكاديمية اليوم negative theology، يعني الله كريم بمعنى أنه ليس بخيلا ورحيما، لأنك إذا قلت كريم والكريم مثلا يغفر دائما، والله لا يغفر دائما ويعاقب أيضا، أو هو غفور ليس غفورا بإطلاق وهكذا. فلا، هو غفور يعني أنه لا يحنق وأنه لا ينتقم، مع أنه اسمه المنتقم، ولابد أن يكون لانتقامه معنى يختلف عن انتقام البشر وهكذا. الأستاذ عبد الله تجاوزنا. الأستاذ محمود أو مع عبد الله؟
السؤال الأول ربما تعرضت له في الحديث المجاز تطويل النص. السؤال الثاني وأنا في جانب البراكتس، وهو إذا أنا في التعريف يطلب أن يتناول في تطبيقهم ويراكم حفظون ومعهم أنما كنتم هكذا، هل يمكن يعني تشغلنا في مصنع الخلق إذا تناولنا السياق التعامل؟ نموذج جاء تم مناقشته في هذه المحاضرات الابتدائي شاهدت في النسيج شيء، وتم تناول صورة الله خلق الإنسان على صورته وكذا، فدخلت التأويلية البيت ماذا عن الإله ما وجود معنا أيضا وهكذا، فبدأ يشرح له وجود في كل وهكذا. قال له حتى وجهنا الكتاب، قال نعم. قال له فماذا يفعل أعجبنا الفيلم ولم يعجبني؟ فنحن نمر في المجتمع يعني بعيدا عن التفجير مباشر وقابلنا مع المسلم داخل الغرب في الواقع الغربي، سواء في الفكر او جانب اخر من
وهذه فرصه.
كيف يمكن تناول هذا السبب المجسده الإبراهيمية لوضع صورة لطفل يتمسك بصورة إله تمثل جزءا من
هذه أظن أن هذه فرصة، لأن هناك طبعا هذه المشكلة موجودة في كل المجتمعات. في المجتمع الأمريكي هناك امرأة نسيت اسمها كتبت عن أن لها أحفادا مسلمين، وأن ابنتها تزوجت برجل من أصل إيراني، والأولاد تربوا على أن يصلوا بالعربية بعض الشيء ويعرفون بعض الأدعية بالفارسية. فعندما أرادت الجد أن تدعو لله سبحانه وتعالى باللغة الإنجليزية، قال الأحفاد God doesn't know English، يعني أنت ستتكلمين مع، فتثور مشكلة كالمشكلة التي تصفها. هذه فرصة والله أعلم أمامنا أن نطرح تماما مسألة اللغة، لأنه كلام شيلر مهم. شيلر يقول إذا كنت إفريقيا فالله إفريقي، وإذا كنت هنديا فسيكون الله هنديا. لا يمكن أن يكون إما أن الله سبحانه وتعالى هو كل هذا أو ليس بهذا، وتقاليد الكلام تقول ليس بهذا، لأن الكل يدرك هذه المشكلة. إذا كان الله معك مثلا وأنت تزني فلماذا يترك لك الحرية؟ وإذا كان الله معك وأنت تتصدق وتحاول أن تخفي هذه المسألة، فهل تخفيها عن الله سبحانه وتعالى؟ تعرف في الصوفية لهم أيضا كلام مضحك في هذه المسائل، يعني لابد أن تكون تقيا جدا حتى كأنك لا تريد أن يعرف الله سبحانه وتعالى ما تفعل. هذه كلها أسئلة مفيدة، أحيانا يصعب على الطفل أن يفكر فيها وأحيانا لا يصعب. يعني أنا أولادي منذ 5 سنوات وهم في سن 9 بدأت هذه الأسئلة. المهم المشكلة يعني القضية الأساسية، هل عندك القدرة على الصراحة أن تقول مثلا في بعض المسائل لا أدري؟ أنا السبب الذي يجعلني أؤمن بالله سبحانه وتعالى هو أنني لا أثق أبدا بالتفسير المادي الحديث. المادية القديمة يعني أكثر احتراما من المادية الحديثة. المادية الحديثة تكاد تكون مضحكة. يعني رجل مثلا مثل تشارلز داكنز يقول أنت صدفة في العالم مثل الجبل، يعني وجودك صدفة كما وجد الجبل. الجبل طبعا نتيجة بعض التكسيرات والمشكلات التي حصلت في تاريخ الأرض فظهر الجبل شكله معين صدفة. يمكن لصاحب العلم أن يدرس احتمالات هذه الصدفة، الضغط الذي مورس what do they call them in Arabic اللي هم the plates, right? The plates under the continents اللي هم بنقول عليهم ايه؟ السطائح دي. فهذه كلها صدفة. طيب يكون بالتالي ريتشارد داكنز صدفة، ويكون رأيه صدفة أيضا ولا يستحق الاحترام. هذا كلام مثل 60 ذراع. يعني تشارلز داكنز عندي مثل طوله 60 ذراع، كلام واحد يتهرب. المشكلة قائمة، نحن لا نعرف الله سبحانه وتعالى، لكن نظن ظنا قويا أن العالم لم يوجد نفسه، وأن الانفجار الأول والتطور لا يشرحان المسألة. نحن يعني لا نرفض طبعا البحث، لكن مجموع الانفجار الأول، طب الانفجار الأول منذ 14 مليار سنة أليس كذلك؟ والآن يظنون هناك ما يسمى بالتقوقع الكبير، بيج بانج وبعدين بيج كرانش. بيج كرانش تسمح ببيج بانج another one. يعني كلام طبعا أنا أعرف، عندي أصدقاء كثيرون هم أستروفيزيست ينظرون على الصور ويخمنون المسافات بين النجوم، لكن العقلاء منهم يعرفون أن هذا لا يقدم تفسيرا للوجود. الفلاسفة مع ضعف أدواتهم أقدروا على طرح الأسئلة الصحيحة. ولذلك أنا مؤمن بالله سبحانه. نعم لا أعرف الله سبحانه وتعالى، أراه أحيانا في الأفعال وفي الأحداث، وأحيانا لا أراه، أحيانا أظن أنني بعيد. فلي أن أقول هذا لأولادي أنني لا أعرف كثيرا، هناك أشياء لا أعرفها، هذا ربما أحسن. أنا أطلت، دعنا نتوقف ونستعد للطعام. شكرا جزيلا.
But what I actually remember that you said, and resonated another hadith that also says that that you can yourself be the truth of God. So this is the thing which we can mind before actually thinking about the Situna down, because if we believe that we're dinosaurs someday, we can find it.
If we were contemporaries of the dinosaurs, right? So they supposedly got extinct in 65 million years ago. So you have to imagine.
Passionate, compassionate, so all these things are supposed to be people which is living in this world like us. To be merciful, we should be compassionate.
Right. No. Thank you so much. This is a great end. You have the last word. Thank you so much.
I didn't know whether you are in favor of keeping someone off his face.
Oh, no, I mean, of course, by the way, we learned, I mean, in the American society with all its problems, one of the things that are not open to question is beating your kids. Now, I assume that the kids need beating, right? When I started out, the family, I assume, no, the kids will always have a, it's not true. They don't. You can make them feel bad about some of their mistakes. They get it. They understand it, even when they're young. So actually, there's no reason to beat your kids. That's true. By the way, my dad didn't beat me that much, maybe once or twice. And of course, I forgive it, you know. Yeah. No, we didn't. Thanks so much.
Yes, up to the restaurant.